Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Garage Biljon. We are going to continue the clutch job on the Safari today, but before we do that, I want to boast just a little bit, and that is that I have cleaned up my garage counters. So everything that was on the floor and under the car is back where they belong. All the tools are in the tool chest, all my fluids are in my fluid area, and all my special tools are in the special toolbox. So I'll be able to find things again. I did not find my Loctite, so I bought a new tube, but that means we are ready to continue the work on the clutch and to finish up the driveline. So join me under the car and we'll get going. Alright guys, so we're ready to install the new flywheel bolts, and then if we look at what I'm going to be doing it with, this is what I didn't have last time. It's Loctite 243, so it's just something that keeps it in there with hand tools. You can still always get it loose, but it just makes sure it doesn't back itself out. So we're going to get the Loctite on there and we're going to start torquing up the first bolt. Alright, so we have to torque these bolts at 65 pound-feet. That's roughly 80 Newton meters. So I'll be bracing the flywheel through one of its teeth with a screwdriver. 80 Newton meters is not a huge amount of torque, so I think that'll be fine. Just one more bolt to go and she's all torqued up. So I'll go one more round to make sure that they haven't moved.
So we'll go to this one.
Now we're going to mount the clutch plate, the pressure plate and the bell housing. So that's going to be the next combination of things we're going to do. Before I do the clutch and the pressure plate, I actually have a little bit of a side project. As you guys remember, in a previous video, I restored the battery clamp that was on the car. Even though that was a fun little side project, the result wasn't what I was looking for, so I ended up ordering a new bracket, and I was planning on ordering the back bracket as well because that one's not in any better shape. But those are no longer available, so I have done the best I could. This is the bracket that holds the back of the battery on. I removed it from the car. It was slightly bent upwards, so I've tried to make it as perfect as I can using my vise and a couple of hammers, and then after that I gave it a good coating of hammerite. So this is now ready, but I'm still worried that the battery doesn't quite seat properly into this area. There's still some room here, so I went scurrying around all of my stock and I found this insulation tape. It's meant for stopping wind coming into your window frames. It's not a great color, it's white, but you'll never see this. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually use this to just build up a layer of rubber here on the inside. So this is how it clamps onto the battery. So then it'll have a little bit more clamping force is my hope. So let's quickly get that done and then we'll get this installed in the car and we can see if the battery is now securely mounted, because this is one of the things I need to have sorted to go through my roadworthiness. Alright, so I've got a bit of a mixture of all the new. I've got some new locking nuts, and I've got a couple of rings here. This is the old nut that I just cleaned up. I'm not going to paint it because there's no point, and a new spring as well. So let's get that mounted onto the car. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean this area up. This is the back of the battery tray, so where that clamp goes on that I've just put the piece of rubber on. And you can already see the contour down here on the battery where it needs to clamp onto. So first thing I'm going to just quickly clean up the rust that I'm seeing in this area, and I'll neutralize it with some rust neutralizer, and then we can bolt up the bracket. Alright, so most of the surface rust is now removed again. It's never going to be perfect on this car anyway. But what I've bought, and I've actually bought this for the underside of the car, for at the back where the gearbox goes. It's called Epoxy Brunox. It says that it stops the rust and it gives it a undercoating. So this seems like the perfect solution for me fixing up rusty spots like this on the car. So I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to let it dry and then we can put on that bracket. Alright, so this is the new bell housing that I got from Eric. This will go on the car. I've already disassembled a lot of what goes inside here. So you can see these two arms over here is attached to the arm here where the clutch cable goes on. So when you step on the clutch, it has a forward motion like you can see here. That forward motion is actually executed on this guy, which is called the throw out bearing. And you can see the throw out bearing has a surface that can spin around. The reason it does that is because this is static while the car moves, but the pressure plate is not static, right? This is spinning together with the flywheel. This is actually the whole reason I'm stripping out this clutch, was because this was making a noise in the previous setup. The bearing was completely gone. This sits onto there, and while this is spinning and driving the car, when we step on the clutch, this moves forward. It applies pressure on this plate, and as these fingers push inward, there is a gripping surface on the inside, this guy, that actually moves back. So this comes in and that pushes this back, and as that moves back, it releases pressure on the clutch, which means the clutch can now stop spinning, which allows the gearbox at the back to come to a standstill, because the clutch is what's connected to the drive shaft. You'll see there's no connection to the drive shaft with any of the flywheel or the pressure plate. So now the gearbox comes to a standstill, which means you can change gears, and then as you release the clutch, the pressure on these fingers gets released and this moves forward again and the clutch will engage. So I'm replacing all the things that can go wrong in here, everything I can find at least. There are some bearings and things I cannot find, so I've cleaned up this as good as I can, and I'll put some lithium grease inside the bearing area to make sure that that's well lubricated. So let me assemble this. You guys will follow along. I'll put on the new guide sleeve because this is the one that came out of this bell housing. It's actually not in bad shape. This is the brand new one I've got. So that's what I'll put in first, and then once that's done, I will put on the release bearing or the throw out bearing, and then once that's all done, we can start building up the clutch in the car. Right, so I've got the new guide sleeve on. Put some Loctite on there as well, because you don't want that to come off in the car. It'll be disastrous. And I've got the new throwout bearing on. What's important to do is there is a spring that has to latch onto the back of this. Let me see if I can create some space there. You can see there's the bit of a indent there, and the spring on both sides has to hook into that. Once that's done, you know she's in place. And now you can see that this can spin around freely. So the rust inhibitor has actually now dried. You can see it forms almost like a clear coat, which is an interesting look. But since you're never going to see this again, I'm not too worried. So I can now put back the clamp. If I wiggle the battery now, she's pretty much stuck in a spot. So that's number 2 of the roadworthiness failures fixed. Back to the clutch. All right, let's get under the car and see if we can make this puzzle work. All right, the first thing I need to do, because I forgot to do it, is I need to grease the pilot bearing. It's still just the way it came out of the packaging, so I'm going to get that done, and then we are going to put on a clutch centering tool, which basically sits inside this pilot bearing, and that'll help me to slide the plate on, slide the pressure plate on, and make sure that it's perfectly center, because if it's not perfectly center, this drive shaft will never slide into it. Alright, so you guys can see I've got the clutch centering tool hanging in the pilot bearing. I've got the clutch disc hanging here. I've got the pressure plate hanging here. Make sure that when you put the clutch disc in, that it goes in the right way. There's a text on the inside that says which way goes to the flywheel. Before I start bringing all these things together, I'm actually going to just degrease it again. Make sure that there's nothing that's contaminating the plate and the pressure plate and the flywheel. Alright, so this is the generic clutch centering tool that I bought a couple of months ago, and it was too long, so I've cut off the end. Hopefully now I'll get the bell housing, the pressure plate and the clutch plate in there with this short stubby centering tool, because I can't get the bell housing on once the pressure plate's on. I simply don't have enough room. I need like 1 centimeter more. But at the back there, I've got no room to move this torque tube even further back. So let's hope this works. And you can see the centering tool sitting right there. And the goal of that is to try and get the clutch sitting right in front of the pilot bearing, so that when I push this drive shaft through, I'm not going to get any resistance for it wanting to bite. We're almost there. Alright, so I've now got the pressure plate just loosely tightened. I think the clutch is centered. I'm a little worried. I think that tool I bought is a bit dodgy. But what I've done now, I've just moved the bell housing to the spot where it belongs. I will just bring 1 or 2 bolts and just lightly tighten it, because before I do the final assembly on this, I want to make sure that this drive shaft actually slides in. Alright, so I've got most of the bell housing bolts now in and tightened all the way to the top. There's only one at the very top that I have to do from the engine side to be done up. And this. So what I can do now is I can try and bring the drive shaft through the hole here and see if I can get it all the way through the clutch. Alright, so you guys can see I managed to move it a little bit closer, and I'm playing with the angle of the engine. So I'm going to add one more bolt into here, and I'm going to see if I can gently pull the torque tube in using the bolts. Alright, success. So all 4 bolts are in. These are the new bolts. She's sitting flush against the bell housing, and that means the whole drivetrain is now in alignment. So I'm now going to start backing out one by one of these bell housing bolts, and I'll put some Loctite on, and then I'll torque them down. Alright, everything's buttoned up underneath, and the last bolt is also tightened up top. Which means the next step is for us to put back this gearbox. But if you look at this gearbox, there's no way I'm putting it back in the car looking the way it does. So what I'm going to do now is take off the old gearbox mounts, and then we will get this thing under a pressure washer and get most of the gunk off. It's not going to be perfect, but I just want it to be a bit better than it is now. And then once that's done, we can go underneath the car and hang it back up again. But we are on the home stretch, so bear with me and let's get this gearbox sorted out. This is how bad these gearbox mounts were. It just slid off, and I'm pretty sure if I do this side, it'll do the same. There we go. That was not safe at all. Alright, she stripped, so the mounts are off, and I also took off the shift linkage. So now it's just basically a bare gearbox. So let's roll it outside and get the gunk off. Alright, I managed to get the gearbox out onto the driveway, and we'll give it a clean. It's not perfect, but it's so much better. All of the gunk is off. As you can see, there's no more oil residue on this gearbox. I will let this dry, and then we'll take it back inside. Alright, so the gearbox is ready to go back in. I've got the shift linkage back in again. I have the brackets painted up, and I've got the new gearbox mounts on both sides mounted as well. But this video has been long enough, and this has been a long weekend for me, so this is not happening today. I'll probably get it done during the week. So the next episode you'll see the results of my labor. But for now, this is the end, and I would like to thank you for watching and staying with me for so long. I know this has been a long video. I also noticed that many of you that are watching are not subscribed, so maybe if you like what you see, consider subscribing and share with your friends. So this is the last job. I'll do this off camera, and then when you join me next time, we will be working on the front suspension. So until next time, goodbye.